Can you tell us more about this law?
First, I think it's important to set a little bit of a baseline here. California has some of the highest housing costs in the country. The median home price is now many multiples what the median household income earns. So the typical California family doesn't have a path to homeownership. The typical California renter spends at least a third of their income, and in many cases, half of their income just making rent. And then we have the largest homelessness population in the country. Over 100,000 Californians sleep on the streets every night. Many hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to leave the state altogether. So we're in a five-alarm fire of a housing crisis. We have to take bold measures to get California building. And that's why we have a crisis. California has overregulated the housing market for decades, and now we have a significant shortage. If you look at what SB 9 does, where it applies, most of where it applies are existing commercial areas and existing multifamily areas. There are a handful of parts of the state where local regulations say the only thing that can be built in these areas is a detached single-family home, despite the fact that it might be next to a major job center or it might be next to major transit lines. And in fact, many property owners in those areas might say, hey, if the government would allow me, I would like to build more housing on my lot. But local regulations don't allow that. So to my mind, I'm absolutely agnostic as to housing. I would say, look, let the market provide all different types of housing and we'll find out what's best for consumers. I think if you ask a lot of real estate professionals and young professionals who are trying to become homeowners in California, the best type of housing for them, the housing that's affordable in their price range, is going to be a townhouse or a small lot home or a 2 or 3 bedroom condo where they can become a homeowner and start a family and start building wealth. So to my mind, absolutely nothing wrong with a single family home. I grew up in a single family home. I can see at many points in my life that making sense. But it doesn't make sense for government regulations to say that's the only form of housing that we're going to allow.
Can you explain that? How would it work? Some reasonable amount of housing along these transit areas. Can you tell us the details?
Absolutely. So we've designated certain types of transit lines that would be eligible. So just rail, so subway lines, commuter rails that meet a really high frequency. So there are lots of trains running to and from job centers each day. And then bus rapid transit lanes. So bus lines where the bus has a dedicated lane 24 hours a day, and it's going much quicker than a typical bus. This is a really limited geography of California. This is, I think, something on the order of 2 or 3% of California, mostly clustered in extremely high-cost places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. And it would say, okay, in these places where the state and the federal government have invested billions of dollars in high-quality transit to job centers, local governments would have to allow some housing. This would scale based on the quality of the infrastructure and the quality of the transit. But essentially it would say, okay, hey, we need workforce housing, we need multifamily housing, we need the types of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments that are going to be immediately affordable to working and middle class families. And that's a sliding scale based on the quality of the transit. Doesn't apply in the vast majority of the state, doesn't apply in parts of the state that have no transit whatsoever, really only applies in those very transit-rich, jobs-rich parts of the state where the crisis is at its worst.
So the idea is to put up to 6-story buildings in these areas, right?
That would be the most extreme case. So near the Los Angeles subway, for example, where you've got high quality transit to and from many job centers. Yeah, within a reasonable distance of that, a quarter mile of that, you might local jurisdictions will be required to allow mid-rise housing. So 4 or 5 stories of apartments over shops. The vast majority of these areas that are covered are commercial areas, or they're areas that already have apartments. But there are some parts of the state where significant investments have been made in extremely high quality transit, and local zoning regulations continue to make it illegal to build anything other than a single family home. And if you actually look at those single family homes, those are not homeownership opportunities for working and middle class Californians. Those are $2, $3, $4, $5 million homes that only the very wealthy can afford to live in. And if we limit our state to housing of that type, we're never going to get back on track and attract the families that are leaving the states in droves.
Because you're next to transit, is the idea for these people not to have cars and just use the transit? Is that what you guys are thinking?
I think they would have choice. I mean, some developers would say, I can't rent these units out or I can't sell these units unless I provide off-street parking. So some will provide off-street parking and some won't. There are many California households for whom maybe having one car or no car is the best opportunity for them. There are many households who might only need one car or for example, retirees who don't need to own a car and for whom a unit in a multifamily building where the property is managed and there's on-site security is the best opportunity. So as with so much of what's gone wrong with California housing, I think the goal here is just to allow for a range of housing types to be built. The vast majority of most California cities, the only thing that can be built is a detached single-family home. And that's great. Of course, that's the dream, and we need to continue building that on the suburban periphery. But if we're going to make existing job centers more affordable, we have to also be building infill, and we have to be building infill that accommodates young families. We have to be building infill housing that accommodates empty nester retirees, a range of housing types that accommodate a range of Californians. SB 79 targets the particular types of housing that are least provided for, which is the apartments in areas where folks will have easy access to job centers and potentially be able to walk or take transit for most of their daily needs.
You guys have passed a number of laws. We have the ADU laws and the SB9 and different kinds of laws that will increase the density of California cities significantly. Some people might argue that this is becoming too much and it will change the character of our neighborhoods.
It's a great question. I mean, I would say that the character of California is changing dramatically. When I was growing up, I had an aunt and uncle who had moved out to California. They're a middle-class family. They were able to buy a home. They were able to raise kids out here. Now, if you look at the home that they'd bought in the 70s or 80s, it would be completely unaffordable to a middle-class family. So the character of California is changing dramatically. Our working and middle-class families are being priced out, and only really the wealthiest people are able to stay in California. The question is, how do we reverse that undesirable change in character and the demographic change in character of folks having to leave the state? Well, we have to build more housing. There's a lot of folks who are from California and want to stay here. There's a lot of folks who want to move here. And we can either say, well, we're going to become an increasingly affordable, exclusionary state where working and middle class families don't have a place, or we can build more housing to accommodate that. I think in recent years, we've done a few things that have been really positive on this, allowing for accessory dwelling units or granny flats or mother-in-law units, as they're variously called. Those have empowered homeowners to add an additional unit to their property. That's unlocked something on the order of 100,000 new homes that wouldn't have existed if the state hadn't come in to protect the rights of property owners from local regulation. So that's a positive example, but we need housing of all different varieties. We need homeownership housing, we need ADUs, we need townhouses, we need small lot single family homes, and we also need apartments.
One of the things that has happened is that the cities have lost control. And because the state has taken over, the cities almost have no say in these new laws, the way they're passing. And if the state could help them or give them some incentives to do the development instead of punish them, which is right now they're facing punishments if they don't meet their numbers.
Well, so I would say something that's been added to the law is for the small number of jurisdictions where this law would apply. And again, this is a few dozen jurisdictions across California where SB 79 would apply. They have the option to adopt a local alternative plan that's well designed to reflect local conditions, where they say, hey, okay, these are the areas within a quarter or a half mile of transit, but density doesn't make sense in this entire area, so we'll move some of the density to places where it does make more sense. So local governments under this law will have wide authority to adopt local alternative implementation plans, and that's a really powerful tool. We're going to be beefing that up in future iterations of the law. The other thing I'll say here is I completely agree. We have to expand support for local governments that are building a lot of housing. Not every city. I think the discourse ends up beating up on cities that are not doing their fair share and that are making it really hard to build. And that's a big problem. That's a problem that SB 79 is trying to address. But a lot of cities in California are already building a lot of housing and doing more than their fair share. And those are the cities, in fact, that have actually come out and endorsed SB 79. Cities like Emeryville or Sacramento or various smaller cities, even across metropolitan Los Angeles, they say, hey, we're allowing a lot of housing, we're building housing, but all of the cities around us are building absolutely nothing. And in many cases, those are the cities that are asking for the state to nudge every city to at least allow some housing, so all the burden's not falling on the handful of cities that do allow more housing. So I completely agree that we have to expand support for cities that are building more housing, but we also have to put guardrails and protect the rights of property owners to add housing and make sure that every city is at least allowing the market to provide a reasonable amount of housing.